Hi guys! Spring is upon us for many people in the Northern Hemisphere, so I figured it is time for a spring cleaning unhaul. Some books I've actually already sold because I'm impatient and they were special editions, so I'm gonna go through those first. First up is some Olive Blake ones, including the Atlas 6 and the Atlas Paradox. These are the Fairy Loot editions. I pre-ordered the Atlas Paradox before I read the Atlas 6 because I was so sure I was gonna love the Atlas 6, and I didn't. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I think if the Atlas Paradox had been out when I did finally read the Atlas 6, I probably would have still picked it up, but where I had some time to kind of think on my feelings about the book in between, by the time I got the Atlas Paradox, I really wasn't interested in reading it. And the reviews I've seen have been, like, not overwhelmingly negative, but the critiques are ones that would probably kind of kill the series for me. And I just didn't want to bother. There's so many books in the world to read, and I don't want to suffer through mediocre ones. And I know this is a really popular series, so I feel bad, or like, I don't know. I feel like my opinions aren't usually quite so contrary to the overall opinion, but I just think the Atlas 6 is a little overhyped for me, and the writing's lovely, but it feels empty ultimately. And that's also the critique I had with Alone with Us in the Ether, which I also sold. I had the Waterstone special edition. I was hoping a contemporary non-fantasy book would do it for me, but it did not, unfortunately. Again, her writing is really lovely if you appreciate very purple prose. I don't dislike dense descriptive writing. I just, like, it felt... I don't want to use the word pretentious because I feel like that cheapens what she is doing there. It doesn't feel pretentious, but it just feels lacking something at the core. And maybe it's just that I don't connect with her characters very much, and I'm a very character-driven reader, but it just, something about Olive Blake just doesn't work for me. So yeah, these ones are gone and out of my life now, and finally I've also sold the Fairy Loot edition of Six Crimson Cranes. I did actually think this edition was super lovely, and I love the book, but I do actually prefer the US cover for once. That's super rare, but where Fairy Loot is a UK-based company, their special editions are transformations on the UK covers, and I just, like, the US artwork is so beautiful for this series. And I just wanted those in my collection. So I'm trying to not have multiple editions of the same book unless it's like a top fave. And while I love Six Crimson Cranes, it is not. So I'm sticking to one edition. So yeah, no hate on this book. I just don't have space on my shelf for it. And I didn't end up pre-ordering the matching edition for A Dragon's Promise from Fairy Loot either, so I figured someone who was maybe trying to collect the two would appreciate it, and also it is already gone. 2 more special editions that I do have up for sale on my Mercari, which I will link down below if you are interested, that have not sold as of the recording of this video, is Veronica Roth's Poster Girl. This, unfortunately, just is not my genre. I have read Veronica Roth in the past. I read the Divergent series when it was coming out. It was fine, but unfortunately, dystopian just isn't really my genre anymore. Like, I liked a couple series when I was a teenager, but it's just not something that I reach for. And while I do think the premise of this one is interesting, it's such a low priority for me because I have so many other, like, fantasy, sci-fi, romance, horror books that I just prefer to pick up first, that I just don't know when or if I'm ever going to pick this one up. And I haven't seen, like, super strong reviews for it, so I don't know. There's nothing really, like, putting this at the top of my TBR, so I just think I don't need a special edition of this. If I do pick it up eventually, I can get it from the library or something. I do like the sprayed edges on this edition. I think that's cool. And the cover is quite nice. I prefer this to the US cover as well. So I don't think this is a necessarily bad book. I haven't even read it. Don't really have much interest in it, unfortunately. And the little I know about this plot is that, like, our main character sort of unintentionally became the poster girl for an oppressive regime, and what her life looks like after that. And I don't know exactly what the sci-fi elements of this are, but it's, again, just not really my genre, so I'm gonna let it go. And the last one I currently have up for sale is The Ones We Burn by Rebecca Mix. This is also the Fairy Loot edition. I really actually do like those sprayed edges. I think ombre is sort of underrated. I just, again, don't really have much of an interest in this one. It is a YA fantasy. It kind of had some controversy surrounding it when it came out, or actually I think before it came out even. It was like in the ARC phase. I haven't read it, so I can't speak to the accuracy of those statements. That in combination with like the plot, or what I'm aware of the plot being of this book, it just doesn't really draw me in. I'm not curious enough about the controversy to read it because of that, and the summary of the plot itself isn't enough to intrigue me enough to pick it up either, so also letting this one go. Now into some non-special editions. I will say most of these I have read, but there are some unread books on this list. Starting off with some short story collections, I tried and failed with this one. I don't think the content is bad, it's just the format for me is really difficult. Short stories have a lot of work to do in like hooking a reader enough for each and every story, and I just really struggle with that personally. By the time I feel fully seated in a world, the story is wrapping up and we're moving on to something else, and just the whiplash from that is just not enjoyable to me. So the first one is A Phoenix First Must Burn, which is edited by Patrice Caldwell, and it includes authors such as Elizabeth Acevedo, Patrice Caldwell, Rebecca Roanhorse, Daniel Page, Karen Strong. So this is all like black girl magic, fantasy, sci-fi short stories surrounding young black women, and I like the idea of that a lot, and I read 5 or 6 stories. I was trying to read one a day in February, and it felt more of like a chore. I did like the idea for several of these short stories, but again, by the time I was like fully about to appreciate one, it ended, and it was just really frustrating for me. So I think this format just isn't for me, and I'm gonna let this go, and hopefully someone that will enjoy this much more than me will find it at my used bookstore and really appreciate the find. And in that same vein, I'm also letting go of The Book of Dragons, which is edited by Jonathan Strahan. This also has a ton of authors. There's Zen Cho, Daniel Abraham, Ken Liu, KJ Parker, RF Kwong, Kelly Barnhill, etc. So I picked it up because I was really excited. I knew a lot of these authors going into it, but I just, again, short story is not really my format. And I have also heard quite recently that this read was kind of disappointing for some people because, like, this is supposed to be fantasy short stories surrounding dragons and like different cultural takes on them, but there's also a lot of like metaphorical and symbolic dragons rather than like real literal dragons, and I just prefer to read a story about real dragons. And I have a ton of full-length novels on my TBR about dragons that I think I would rather put my time towards reading, so I'm gonna let this one go as well. Then we have a duology where I read and quite liked the first book. I definitely had problems with it, but overall it was enjoyable. It was like a 3.5 star for me. And then I waited over a year to pick up the second book, which like that was on me. The second book was out. I could have picked it up right away and I didn't. And by the time I did try, I remembered nothing. Unfortunately, it is not the type of book that you can go into just with a really hazy memory, and sitting with it for a couple of days, I realized I wasn't interested in rereading the first one, so I figured it was time to let the duology go, and that is the Sands of Arabia duology, We Hunt the Flame and We Free the Stars. I'm so sad because I've heard this as a really great like slow burn enemies to lovers, and the writing is quite pretty, but the world building really frustrated me in the first book. That was like one of my main critiques. I thought it had a good cast of characters, but I was just really frustrated by like some gaps in knowledge or like lack of world building in other cases, and yeah, I don't know. I also didn't super care for the prince character, which was a little frustrating because he's the love interest, so, and like also one of the main point of views. I am still interested in reading Hafsa Faisal. She has another book in the works called I think it's like Tempest of Tea. sounds incredible, and I definitely want to pick that one up. Then we have some recent romances. I think I read all of these in February or DNF'd them in February. So we have Donut Fall in Love by Jackie Lau. This follows a celebrity movie star and a baker in Toronto, and the movie star is going to be on a nailed it type of baking show called Baking Fail, and he ends up enlisting the services of this baker to help him not embarrass himself too much. I did end up DNFing this one. I just was not feeling the connection between these two, unfortunately, and I personally really struggle with romances that involve a famous character. They have to be done really well and avoid certain common tropes pertaining to that sort of subgenre of romance that just sort of annoy me. So unfortunately, this one just wasn't doing it for me. I don't think it's bad or poorly written. It just wasn't for me, unfortunately. And in a similar vein, I also ended up DNFing The Royals Next Door. While this isn't necessarily like the love interest is a celebrity, he is the bodyguard of a prince and princess who are very similar to Harry and Meghan in their real life dramas and controversies. And while I am sympathetic towards them, I'm sort of also sick of hearing about them, just with like the documentary and the memoir that just came out. I think the timing was bad. If I had read this when I first picked it up, I probably would have read all the way through, because I do like the idea of a bodyguard romance. It was too similar to real life, and I was more annoyed than entranced or intrigued, so I put it down. Then romances that I have finished but just don't love enough to keep. We have The Fastest Way to Fall by Denise Williams. I have read and still own another book by her that I really enjoyed, but just like the setup of this one didn't do much for me. The main character is a writer for like a magazine, and she takes on writing and reviewing a lifestyle app that sets you up with a personal coach, not necessarily to lose weight, but just to make like healthier lifestyle decisions. And in the process, she ends up getting paired with the personal trainer who is also a co-founder of a company, and he becomes a love interest. So this is also tangentially like has some of those problems that celebrity romances do, where he is a public figure. So that also rubbed me the wrong way. And I just didn't connect to this one like I did her previous work. So I think this will absolutely work for some people. It just didn't work for me. So I gave it 3 stars overall, but space on my shelf is limited, so I'm not going to hold on to it. This next book I gave 1 star, so I'm definitely not hanging on to it, and that is Ben and Beatriz by Catalina Gamarra. This is a Much Ado About Nothing Shakespeare retelling, but it is such a bummer. It doesn't even feel like a romance half the time, because there's some really dark stuff happening in the background that makes the romance feel like kind of icky, honestly. So this just did not do it for me. It's also like, I feel a lot of people pick up romance to escape from reality, and this one just reminded you so much of the political atmosphere of 2017, like post-Trump president election, and again, that was a real big bummer, so I just didn't want to read about that, but it kept hitting you over the head with it. Our main characters are from 2 different worlds. The guy, Ben, is very rich and privileged, whereas Beatriz has a much rougher background, and she's also a queer POC, and so they butt heads a lot. Eventually they overcome some of these challenges, but again, there's just some bad stuff happening in the background that really ruined this for me. So I finished it because my best friend wanted me to, so we could trash talk it together, but I will be letting this go. These next 2 are ones I've had for quite some time, and I've moved these across the country with me, but I just don't see myself rereading them. And they are the sequels to Shadow of the Wind, The Angel's Game, and Prisoner of Heaven by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I love Shadow of the Wind, and I plan to reread that eventually, hopefully maybe sometime soon. It was one of my favorite reads from college, my college years, and because I loved it so much, I was like, oh my god, there's sequels. I have to go pick them up. But they just didn't hit the same, which is frustrating. Like Shadow of the Wind, the writing in these are beautiful. I will forever be amazed at how well his work translates from Spanish to English and like still manages to be some of the most beautiful prose you've ever read. But like the plots for these ones just didn't work for me, and they don't follow the same main characters. One of these does focus on like the backstory of a character from Shadow of the Wind, but again, I just didn't hit the same, unfortunately. So I'm gonna let these ones go so they're not taking up any more room on my shelf. I will also be getting rid of The Mirror Visitor and The Missing of Claire de Lune, the first 2 books in the Mirror Visitor quartet. I read The Mirror Visitor in January of 2022. And I really, like, still to this day don't know how I feel about it. And I don't know if it's like a translation thing because these were originally published in French, but it is just so weird to me. It's a really interesting setup and the world was really cool. We follow a character named Ophelia, and this world is set up of like spires floating in the atmosphere. And each spire is home to a single clan or like family. So a lot of people, if you stay on the spire your entire life, like you end up getting married to like a second or third cousin or something, which feels a little weird, but okay. She ends up getting engaged to a man on a different spire. I don't remember what it's called. Sorry, they're called arcs, actually. This arc is really dangerous. It's full of like illusionists and stuff and like very manipulative clans. And so she gets kind of caught up in this political intrigue, and her fiance is also very cold and harsh and distant, and she feels very isolated in this world. And this is advertised as like very slow burn enemies to lovers, and perhaps it is, but at least by the end of book 1, I don't like the love interest, so it makes it really hard for me to want to stick around and see how that relationship continues to develop. The power dynamic and like disparity of independence that these two have is so frustrating to read about, and it's just like you want Ophelia to be protected and no one gives a crap about her, and it's really frustrating. So I did pick up The Missing of Claire de Lune, which is the first sequel, sometime last year, I believe, but I have not been tempted to pick it up at all since. It was going to be a winter read for me, but I'm not feeling it, so I think I'm gonna let these go, and they're kind of hard to find, at least locally, so I'm hoping someone will be really excited to find them in very good condition at my local used bookstore. But yeah, I really wish I had felt the same way about this that a lot of people online do. These covers are insanely gorgeous, and I wanted them to be on my shelf, but unfortunately the story just wasn't doing it for me. Then we have The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan Heath. This is like a sci-fi dystopic tale following these two sisters in a world where the environment is basically ruined. It's toxic. This story mainly focuses on two sisters who are trying to fight to get their way back to one another, and it's a little confusing. I did enjoy it overall, but I did only give it like 3 stars. I didn't love the ending, and the writing just didn't do a whole lot for me either. So this wasn't mind-blowing, and where it's not a favorite, I'm just gonna get rid of it. Then we have Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. When I picked this up, I got it used, so I feel less bad about it. But I did not realize that it was a spin-off series. So this is part of a duology. The second one is called Vow of Thieves, but the first book in this series, it's like the Remnant Chronicles or something, and there's like a trilogy or a quartet or something, and I just have no intention of reading those to get to these. I don't know how well they stand on their own, but it just felt like too much, and I haven't really heard many good things about the Remnant Chronicles or anything really. So this was very popular on Book Talk for a little while, but I bought into the hype because I was curious, but I just don't want to do the back work to get to this one. There's too many other books on my TBR, so this might be excellent, but I don't have time for it, and I'm gonna let it go. Then there's Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. This is about like a baby who washes up like from a river into a community, but like initially she's lifeless, but then hours later she starts breathing again. And this mystery affects the town and the townspeople. And, you know, there's questions of like who she is, where she came from, why did this happen to her? I haven't read this one. There was a point in time where I was interested in doing so, but that time has since passed. I picked it up on a book outlet for a couple of dollars, so I'm not like mourning it too much, but I just know I'm not going to get to it anytime soon, and it's just taking up room on my TBR shelf at this point. Same with The Crane Wife by Patrick Ness. I picked this up for 50 cents at my local bookstore. It's a retelling of the Japanese folktale about the Crane Wife, but I believe it's more of like a modern setting. I recently read The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill, so I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to say I'm like tapped out on that, where I've only read like the one adaptation, but like, I'm not really feeling the folktale, I guess, so I'm not really super curious to pick up another one that follows that same vein. So I'm going to let it go. I struggled with this one for a while. It was on my TBR for quite some time. It was one of those books I picked up because of the hype, like I had heard about it on BookTube and was really curious for quite some time. And I did try to pick it up and I was so confused that I was just like, I don't have the brain power for this right now. And I just haven't felt motivated at all to pick it up since. So I think I'm just going to let it go. And that is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is like a murder mystery, and it like follows someone who's like jumping perspectives and I believe like reliving the night over and over and over again until they find out who the murderer is. Yeah, so the back says, Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until Aidan Bishop can identify the killer and break the cycle. But every time the day begins again, Aidan wakes up in the body of a different guest, and some of his hosts are more helpful than others. I think that is an insanely cool idea, but like it just again failed to grab me the first time I picked this up, and I just haven't felt motivated to read it since. And I have also heard it's super confusing and the payoff is very underwhelming, so I think I'm just gonna let this one go. And like there's just other murder mysteries that I'd rather read. It feels bad to let go of books that I haven't read yet, but I'm trying to be realistic with myself. This next chunk of books is actually, I believe, all nonfiction memoirs. I went through a phase in college where I was like really into reading memoirs, especially of like celebrities and comedians that I really liked from some of my favorite shows like The Office and Parks and Rec. So I picked up their works to like learn more about their personal lives, and I just don't see myself rereading any of these. I gained what I'm going to gain from them, and they've just been kind of taking up shelf space since. I do really like nonfiction, but I think going forward, audiobooks work better for me. Like I get through them faster and I feel more connected to the storyteller, and that way it doesn't take up too much shelf space. First up, we have Ali Wong's Dear Girls. This is like a letter to her daughters and like tales about her life before she had kids and life lessons that she wants her daughters to take from those stories. And I thought it was really funny. If you like her stand-up, this will hit a lot of those same notes for you. I mostly just have a really hard time with this now, where her and her husband are getting divorced. It just will not ever read the same because she talks about her husband so much in this book. It's just so depressing now, like in retrospect. So I'm gonna let this one go, and yeah. Then I have two of Mindy Kaling's books, is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me and Other Concerns, as well as Why Not Me. Again, went through like a really heavy office phase in college, and I did quite enjoy Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me, but Why Not Me was a little underwhelming even when I first read it. I think if you're interested in her personal life, this one especially tells a lot of stories about like her childhood and her mom, and I believe this one came out like right after her mom passed away, so like it's also a bit of a bummer, but like it's touching. But yeah, again, I just don't see myself rereading these. Mindy Kaling as a public figure has also become a little frustrating recently, so I just don't feel as attached to these as I used to, so I'm gonna let them go. Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, which I feel like everyone and their mother has read. I've seen this in used bookstores constantly, so I'm just gonna add this one to it as well. I liked 30 Rock, so I picked this up shortly afterwards, but I like I said with all these, I don't see myself rereading them. I don't even really remember many of the stories about her life from this. So yeah, it just didn't have much of an impact on me, and it's just taking up shelf space. This next one I feel bad because I don't even think I finished it. It's Failure is an Option, which feels appropriate, by H. John Benjamin, an attempted memoir. He did actually have a very funny story about like how someone broke into his house while he was a child and like how his reaction was not normal. His sense of humor is very dry and very self-deprecating, which it fits with H. John Benjamin. You know, I was not surprised. And this is a very short book, but like I put it down at one point and just never felt the urge to pick it back up. So I think it's time to pass it along. I do still really like H. John Benjamin, but I just, I don't even think I've heard many people talk about this one. So apparently I'm not the only one it didn't leave a big impression on, unfortunately. And I have Shit Actually by Lindy West. She is the author of Shrill, which is pretty popular. And this is like her movie reviews about movies that she like mostly does not like. And this is also a really good audiobook, and that's mostly how I consumed this. I did read a couple of them physically, but it was just fun. It kind of felt like a podcast listening to her like shit talk movies. Particularly Love Actually, which is where the title of the book comes from. She does not like that movie, and it is funny. So I think if you like movies, this is a fun book to pick up. She talks about Forrest Gump, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Bad Boys 2, Face Off, Top Gun, The Notebook, Love Actually, Twilight, The Lion King. So some really big recognizable movies that a lot of people have seen. So I think this will do it for a lot of people. I just don't really need to hold on to it anymore. I also have a couple books by Nick Offerman I'm getting rid of, including Paddle Your Own Canoe and Gumption. I actually think Nick Offerman is quite a good writer. He's very philosophical. That man is very deep, but he talks a lot about nature, and I'm just not an outdoorsman. I don't know if you could tell, but that stuff just doesn't really hit with me. But a lot of his stuff is very motivational, even if that stuff doesn't necessarily connect with you. He talks a lot about being like a self-starter and like, you know, just following your passions and stuff, and like that's really nice. And this book is like broken up into chapters about people he admires. I don't remember everybody though. And he talks about like why he admires them. So like it's broken up into parts. So it's like Freemasons, idealists, makers, and those are the 3 parts. Okay. And each chapter is about a different person that he admires and why. And I think that's a really cool setup. I got like halfway through this one and again, put it down, never felt like picking it back up. So I still love Nick Offerman, but I don't read a lot of nonfiction stuff like this anymore, and it doesn't really have a space on my shelf to live. Next up is The Bassoon King by Rainn Wilson. I almost called him Dwight. And this actually does have a foreword by, like, written in the voice of his character Dwight Schrute, which is funny. And again, this is a celebrity memoir. Talks about his life growing up, how he met his wife. He is also a very spiritual man and talks about that quite a bit in this book. But yeah, he has the upbringing that you would expect from him. I don't know. Nothing about this was super surprising. It did have some funny anecdotes, but I read this years ago now and kind of forgot that I even had it. So passing it along. Then we have Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. This is part memoir, but also a study of love in different cultures and what that looks like, and even like over time, how love has changed and marriage and relationships have changed, courtship. So it's a very interesting topic, but it's like not by the person you would expect it to be by. It's like, you know, this actor that like found this topic he was really interested in and did a lot of research about it. So I think if you like Aziz Ansari, it's worth reading, but it's probably not the most like comprehensive or educational view, but it does bring up some very interesting points and like makes you think about like your perspective on love and marriage and relationships in this modern day and age when maybe you wouldn't have before. So I definitely think there's something to be gained from this book. I just don't need to hold on to it anymore. Finally, last book. I have Yes Please by Amy Poehler. This is her memoir. It's actually a very pretty one, and it has like several photos and stuff, like cast photos, and like all the pages are like laminated, so it's very high quality. And this is her memoir. She talks about growing up in like I believe the Boston area and how she got into SNL and later Parks and Recreation, which is fascinating. So if you like her, like I said about several of these other actors, it's worth reading. However, the timing of this one really, I think, affected her writing. It was right as Parks and Rec was ending and her marriage to Will Arnett was also ending, and you can feel that in her writing. It comes across as very bummed out, and reasonably so. Like, obviously, like, I don't fault her for going through a hard time, but it's can be kind of hard to read about someone you think is very funny and lively, and then, like, when you read their inner thoughts, it's like, this is depressing. And she's human. Those feelings are valid. I would never hold those against her. Like I said, I do think it affects the reading experience with this book, so just be prepared for that if you do end up picking this up. It was really interesting, and I do remember, like, several little bits about this book and her life and stuff, and I love her, but yeah, I'm pretty much just getting rid of this entire section of my personal library. Like I said, I think if I'm going to read memoirs in the future, I'm going to listen to the audiobook because that's just how I prefer to. Whew. So yeah, that takes up about 3 reusable bags worth of books. Thank you guys for watching if you're still here. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have 2 of these books up on my personal Macari that I will be putting down in the description box if you are interested in buying them. They're pretty reasonably priced, if I do say so myself. And yeah, let me know if you've read any of these, if you agree with me on getting rid of them, or if you think I'm a criminal for doing so. Love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to like my video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, check out those links in the description below, and as always, have a lovely day. Bye.